Welcome back to the show. This is Mike Kegley with Brad Sturdy, Larry Smith. We've got a treat today. We have Mike Gross, the man who covers Penn State football. And is it the LNP Media? Is that what it's called, Mike?
LNP Media Group,
Okay. LNP Media
Lancaster,
Group,
Pennsylvania.
the home of APBA baseball.
That's correct. Very good.
I used to love that as a kid. I would have loved to have gotten to do the computer thing, but it was just so expensive that I gave up on.
Yeah. I think they've been kind of modernized out of the market a little bit, except for a small group of sort of
Old people.
close. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, that I would qualify. Well, but we've got you on to talk a little bit about Penn State. It, I would tell you right now, the way this season is shaping up, the rest of the way they play USC this weekend and then Ohio State in a couple weeks. But you can look at this as only one game. Ohio State, will they not be the favorite? Is this James Franklin's year? Do I dare say that?
I don't think the first 5 weeks could have gone much better, especially as you sort of alluded to, Mike, in terms of the national picture, especially with so many of the teams that they sort of figured to be vying with for the playoffs and for seeding within the playoffs, have lost already. I mean, Alabama, Georgia, Tennessee, Ole Miss, Missouri, Notre Dame, et cetera, et cetera. And they are the fly in the ointment is they are a little beat up. They have a lot of little injuries, a lot of nagging injuries that might be significant. You could look at the beginning of the season and see the first 5 weeks would be pretty favorable, and especially having four in a row at home. And obviously, it gets a lot more serious this week going out to LA. Their first foray into this cross country travel in the Big Ten. Franklin, of all things, was urging today the approval of the State College Regional Airport, so they have a longer runway so they can fly right out of State College, because they're leaving on Thursday. He said largely for that reason that they can't, it's such a long day because they have to get in a bus and go to Harrisburg, blah blah blah. So that's one thing. But yeah, it has gone, I think, better than any Penn State fan could reasonably have expected it to, from the big picture standpoint.
So you've been following and covering college football for a long time.
Yeah.
How the heck do you rate or evaluate Lincoln Riley? Because I look at his teams. Oklahoma, obviously, he had some success. USC, he has not been able to put it together. And as soon as one side of the ball starts playing well, the other side, you just put your hands up and say, "Do you guys know what you're doing?" How do you
I'm
read
really
that?
surprised that he has not taken off at USC. I thought that was a great hire. I thought that made all the sense in the world. And he's going to find somebody who's a defensive coordinator, and he may have found that guy now in DeAnton Lynn, who is a, by the way, a Penn State graduate, but
Yeah.
also and played at Penn State, but also who he kind of stole from UCLA. He
Yeah.
left UCLA last year to come over, and they are better defensively. They did not play well offensively against Minnesota. How much credit Minnesota get for that? I don't know. And the other thing is they're still not great against the run, which Minnesota took advantage of, and which Michigan really took advantage of a few weeks back, beating USC really without throwing the ball virtually at all.
Right. Right.
And when we watched the way Penn State's offensive line played against Illinois, and the way they ran the ball against Illinois, you would have thought they could go out to USC and really control the game that way and out physical them, and maybe that will happen. But this past week against UCLA, they 2.8 yards per carry. Their front did not play nearly as well. At least it looked to me, against what should have been an inferior run defense, inferior to Illinois. So of course you're back to who knows what to make of all this stuff week to week. That's where we are.
College kids. It does make me think I would love to make 9 million a year, but I'm not certain if I'd want it reliant upon the performance of 18 to 23-year-olds.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. And boy, there's a lot of moving parts in that job and a lot of hours. And I mean, I'm not saying boo-hoo for James
Right,
Franklin, of
right.
course, but it is a big job.
When I look at this game, you see the USC offensive line has looked darn near incompetent at times. With that fearsome pass rush that Penn State basically harassed Luke Altmaier into next season, are you expecting to see another 7, 8 sack game against USC this week?
Well, I don't know about 7 or 8 sacks, but Moss, the quarterback for USC, is a very good player. I think
Yes.
what I've seen, I've been very impressed with him. But he's not a super mobile guy. He's not really a. He's more of a pro style type guy. I think the key to it is a couple of things. One thing that teams have done effectively against Penn State's defense. They haven't done much effectively, but one thing they have done is throw quick underneath routes, get
Mhm.
rid of the ball very quick in rhythm, 6 yard slants, that kind of thing, move the chains on third down. Bowling Green did that very effectively against Penn State. Illinois had their moments, and then I think Penn State kind of fooled them with a disguised the coverage a little bit, and at a critical moment, intercepted that quick slant, and,
Right,
and
right.
that was a huge play in that game. But anyway, one thing that Lincoln Riley can do is teach, route trees and all that kind of stuff. So the key is, will they be able to stretch the field a little bit in the passing game in addition to that quick underneath stuff? I think that's really a key to this game.
Now, when you said Penn State is banged up, who's a little nicked up for the Nittany Lions?
Well, they have one of them is Nick Singleton, the terrific running back who did not play last week. Franklin said they thought he was okay as of Thursday, as of Friday, as of Saturday morning, up until the warm-ups before the game, and then they determined that he couldn't go, and I think they missed him a little. Even though Katron Allen is the other
Right.
running back is very good. And Kevin Winston, their safety who I think really was almost an All-American caliber guy, one of the key pieces on their defense. But then they've had a lot of guys like the Big Ten requires you to do these availability
Yeah.
reports every week. And I scroll through that every week, and Penn State always has 14, 15 names on it every week. A lot of them are guys that are not stars, but it's depth, it's special teams. So that's what they've been dealing with a lot of. And it's not it's not like I think Singleton's going to be back this week. The kid who has replaced Kevin Winston is a true freshman, but he's growing up fast to the point where his name's Duane Lane. They call him Day
Yep.
Lane, and he's growing up fast enough that I think we will see on Saturday some of this three safety thing that Tom Allen likes so much, where he has this sort of hybrid position. The third safety is sort of a linebacker safety hybrid, which they were very effective with, for example, in the West Virginia game when they did have Winston, and they
Yep.
used that look a lot. Reed really played well in that game, and I really think that was the defense's best game of the year, even though it was week one.
How do you see this? How do you see this game going? It seems like I looking at it on the schedule, I thought this was going to be an exciting game. And now I've seen the way Penn State's playing. I wonder if they've improved enough this year that they go out to LA and take care of the Trojans. How do you see it?
Well, I really have a hard time getting a hand. I mean, I always do, but I have a hard time getting a handle on this Penn State team in particular. I did not think they played real well against UCLA.
Yeah.
They dominated. They come out and dominate the third quarter every week. I don't know what that is, but they've been able to do that, and that's sort of you never really had any doubt that they were going to win the game,
Right.
but they held UCLA to -9 yards in the third quarter, and that sort of took all the suspense away. So, but it's hard to get a sense of it. You would think, and I probably would say I did think after the Illinois game that they could have played USC exactly the same way Michigan did, or almost exactly the same way.
Exactly.
And just push them around on the line of scrimmage enough to grind it out. And Penn State has done that a couple of times in the last couple years. They went into Iowa was pretty good last year, and that was they just really pushed Iowa around and beat them 31-0. It was a totally dominant performance. Anyway, that might be the way they can do it. They have some other wrinkles, which Andy Kotelnicki has kind of employed, especially with the tight end, Tyler Warren, who was really a good football player. And it's interesting to note the betting line in this game opened at -4. Penn State a 4-point favorite, and in 24 hours it went to 5.5, which tells me that a lot of people think Nick Singleton's going to play for one thing.
Right.
So I mean, I guess I would have to favor Penn State. I haven't made a prediction yet, but I would have to favor Penn State. Little bit of caution, but it's easy. I think it's easier to see how they could win it than it is to see how USC could win it, if I could put it that way.
You think the cross-country travel has anything to do with it? I've heard that on other sports, it can be a little bit more challenging. To me, for the football guys, travel one game a week, I don't know if it's a huge thing or not. How do you feel on that?
I suspect that it matters less in football than in other sports. That exactly, and especially since they are traveling on Thursday, I think that they have all of Friday to kind of reorient themselves, and I'm sure they'll have, instead of having a physical practice on a Thursday, let's see, they'll have a lot of walkthroughs and stuff like that, which maybe will make them fresher. Who knows in a one-off spot like that. Franklin prepares for these things, obsessive to the point of absurdity about preparing for these things. Whatever you think of him, that's definitely true. So they have a plan, and I don't think it's going to be that big a deal. And UCLA, in a really tough spot with a backup quarterback, traveled across the country at a noon kick, which means it's 9 o'clock in the morning in their biological clocks. And I thought they competed. I thought UCLA really played okay for what they're working with. So I don't think it's a huge deal.
James Franklin is a former Vanderbilt coach. And of course, Vanderbilt tops Alabama to go win their first game ever to 1-60 against number 1 ranked teams. Did he send a basket of fruit or something the Vanderbilt way?
I didn't even think of that. That didn't come up today at the press conference. He talks a lot about, we went 1-0 this week, and look how hard that is to do. Look around the country and see how hard that is to do. And I don't know if there's a better illustration of it than Alabama going to Vanderbilt and losing. And all of a sudden, Alabama's defense is vulnerable. And I just love the fact that the Vanderbilt students tore the goalpost down and then paraded it down Broadway in Nashville and threw it in the river. That sounds like a fable from the 1920s or something. I love that. But what a phenomenal win for Vanderbilt.
Yeah, I thought that was just fantastic as well. Mike, thanks for coming on. We really appreciate it. Penn State is certainly on a roll, so we think big things are coming here for this Nittany Lions team, and who knows, when Ohio State and Oregon knock each other around, might be Penn State. They're waiting to take on the Buckeyes and have a chance at the sole shot at first place in the Big Ten.
Well, we got a long way to go. Way to go, but so far it looks pretty favorable for Penn State. I think that's fair to say.
Folks, we will be right back after these messages. Don't go away.
This is the Run My Own Business dream. This is the colleges paid for dream. This is the retire early dream. This is Busey, where your dreams and possibilities become moments through trusted guidance and expertise, through lifelong relationships. Because we're here to help you achieve the life you've always envisioned.
More on this weekend's big games of the Big Ten. Penn State taking on USC, making the trip out to L.A. We heard James Franklin complaining about that. Cooper Perkins is with us right now. He is the host of the BLEAV in USC podcast. Cooper, welcome to the show. First, I want to get this out of the way. James Franklin complaining because the runway at State College Airport is too short. He's upset that they have to bus over an hour to Harrisburg Airport in order to have a plane large enough to get to Los Angeles. Cue the violins.
Yeah, exactly. You know what? Call your boosters, have them put down some money for a better landing strip. I don't know what to tell you, man. You're in State College. This is not my problem.
Yeah, this will forever be known as the runway game.
Yeah, State College problem, not a Big Ten problem. It's a State College problem.
Correct. This is purely municipality. This has nothing to do with anybody but them. They should either be quiet or worry about fixing it themselves.
Yeah. They've had 2 years to put it together, Mike.
Exactly.
I've got nothing here. FAA, look into this for James Franklin's sanity, please.
Right. We move on. Well, let's talk about this. First, I want to get your thoughts before we get into the football game. USC coming into the Big Ten. It's been talked about for 2 years. What's the mood been like there in LA among Trojan Nation about making this change now that we're actually here?
I think you have to look at it from two different perspectives. The first is, what was it looked at going in, and what does it feel like now? I think that there is an overwhelming sense now that USC belongs, albeit has thrown up on itself twice. They've lost 2 very winnable games. There's a very reasonable situation in which they could be 3-0. Everyone would be absolutely stoked and thrilled to be in the Big Ten if that were the case. I don't think there's any sense of regret that because the first 3 games of the Big Ten slate haven't exactly gone great. I don't think that there's anything like that. But in the big picture sense on other programs, and I'll say it again, leaving the Pac-12 was a tremendous move for USC by USC, and something that I never expected them to actually follow through upon. As a university and as an organization, historically, USC has been very conservative in how it has maneuvered its brand and how it has positioned itself. The Pac-12 did not do anything for USC. USC is the only brand of significant relevance in the Pac-12. And, you can talk about Oregon, you can talk about Washington, but the fact of the matter is when those two got valuations going into the Big Ten, they were received at half valuations, which means objectively they are less valuable than USC. The Pac-12 simply danced on USC's grave after the Reggie Bush sanctions came down and instead preached parity as opposed to trying to defend its most valuable brand. And for the better part of the last decade to 15 years, the Pac-12 was simply a vampire on USC. For a long time, I said that they should go independent in football. Joining the Big Ten is a far better situation than that. It's something that I didn't imagine and didn't think was on the table because it sounds pie in the sky and ridiculous. But here we are in this pie in the sky ridiculous world. And it's going to be an excellent thing. It'll be very difficult from a competition standpoint across all sports. That's a good thing. It's a university and an alumni base that prides itself on being among the best and being the best. And that is not accomplished by simply ascending to the top of a conference that, while competitive, does not serve as a peer. These are not peer institutions for the most part. The Big Ten is loaded with peer institutions, and so much of how you position your school, not just from a competitive standpoint on the field, on the court, it also has to do with how that perception is found, right? Like if you're USC, you're served much more by being associated with Northwestern, Michigan, premier Midwest institutions than you are Oregon State and Washington State. And those two love to talk about how much they've been wronged and how awful everything is and how the world is ending. And the reality is, the only thing separating those two programs from essentially being San Jose State and maybe UC Davis is the fact that they were friends with the big boys 75 years ago. And I'm sorry that friendship expired, but at the end of the day, there was nothing of substance that makes those schools entitled to be associated with major, not just athletic, but also academic brands like USC. I think it's going to be a great thing. I think it's going to be a great thing for everyone involved, not just the Trojans, but also the other Pac-12 schools that have made the move, and also the Big Ten as a whole. I really do see the 18-team contingent across all sports, not just football, really benefiting from this a lot.
Yeah, and that's why Brad and I try so hard to be Larry's friend. It's a very similar situation. The biggest question that I have, and talking on this radio show with other Big Ten insiders, is can Lincoln Riley play call complimentary football to help out his defense? Because those 2 losses, some of it goes down to the offensive play calling, and he's got to for lack of a better word, because he's obviously runs a big program. He's been successful at Oklahoma and USC, but he's got to grow up a little bit if you want to play in the Big Ten.
Yeah, but I mean, at the end of the day, Lincoln Riley's not throwing interceptions or fumbling the football. You turn it over 8 times in 3 games, you go 1-2. That about sounds right. You know, if you just threw it in a vacuum and said USC is going to turn the ball over 8 times, with 2 of those being road games in hostile environments, one of them against the reigning national champions, you'd say, yeah, probably not going to win all 3, probably be lucky to win 2 of them. So I'm not here to whitewash Lincoln Riley's record and his decision-making, because obviously there are areas for improvement. I think he's done a far better job, though, with the complementary football than anyone gives him credit for. USC is losing games because they're turning the ball over and their special teams are garbage. It's not because Lincoln Riley is failing to run a sound 4-minute offense. There have been instances where I think that may apply, but at the end of the day, we're looking at small issues when there are big issues that are actually afoot. You know, if that team takes care of the football, I think then we're in a place to be more critical of him as a coach in his decision making and his play calling, in his maneuvering through the flow of the game. But there's no flow to these games. They're marching the ball between the 20s and turning the ball over in the red zone. They're turning the ball over in the end zone. They're turning the ball over on the edge of the red zone, right? Like, there is such a big difference between a team that is struggling offensively holistically, right? Not able to move the ball, no consistency, no run game, and a team that can move the ball consistently and yet simply explodes in its own face every time they get close to making something happen. And you look at that Minnesota game, right? That's a good example. Because of how the time of possession worked out in that game, because of how both teams ran the ball fairly well, USC basically had a ceiling of 28 points in that game when you factor in the 3 turnovers. Like, if they were perfect on every possession, you take out the turnovers, the best they can do is 28 points. You know, so they get 17. That's not enough to win, but it's also not as bad as it seems, right? Like, you look at a Lincoln Riley team and you expect them to score 40 to 50. Well, when you turn it over 3 times and all of a sudden your scoring ceiling becomes 28, there's no margin for error. So I don't know how much I'm ready to like indict Lincoln Riley. I know the fan base is completely out to lunch on this one. Most of the fans are foolish and reactionary. And
well, it's short for fanatics, right?
Yeah, it's short for fanatics. And I think there's a degree of, whatever sports PTSD you can conjure up from the Clay Helton experience, because there was so much consistently poor coaching and so much consistently failing in those instances of game management and flow management. But that's not why they're losing. They're not losing because of Lincoln Riley failing to run the 4-minute offense. They're losing because they're turning the ball over.
Another great example is we talked to Cooper Perkins, again, host of the BLEAV in USC podcast, was the Michigan game. That think if you eliminate those turnovers, that's a blowout. And even then, they lose on one play. I mean, it came down to one play, and that was a loss. It's been fun for me to watch USC play these Big Ten teams. And I've said before that somebody's done this for a long time. The West Coast, year in, year out, West Coast teams didn't get, I feel, evaluated and players evaluated evenly because they're out there and the East Coast isn't paying attention. Now they have to. Now it comes in Penn State. And again, talk about all the other stuff, whatever. Penn State still, once they drive to Harrisburg and fly to LA, they're a good team. They've shown that they've made some strides on offense. They've got a great running game, and their defense is advertised and maybe one of the best they've had there in a while.
Yeah, the thing with Penn State in this instance has less to do with them and much more to do with the situation of their opponent. In college football, spots matter more than any other sport. And by that, I mean, what are the circumstances surrounding the game for both teams involved? And in this case, USC finds itself in actually kind of a unfamiliar spot, but one that it has witnessed from the other side twice already in the last 3 games, which is the spot of the wounded animal, the team that absolutely under no circumstances can afford to lose a home game in a spot that will likely determine, at the very least, the direction of their next 3 to 5 games, and likely will be highly significant in dictating what the rest of the season looks like. If I'm Penn State, I'm terrified of that, because that is a horrific spot to be in, because generally speaking, very good teams never lose in those spots. Good teams rarely lose in those spots. USC is somewhere between a good and very good team, which means if you're Penn State, you're walking into a really dangerous spot. Travel aside, complaints aside, really everything on the field to this point aside, this spot is dangerous for them. Now, granted, they have a couple of pieces that come into this game. Their pass rush is terrifying for USC. Your offensive line has consistently struggled. The tackles are bad. They're young, they're talented, but right now they're bad. Penn State is going to get pressure. Miller Moss is not particularly mobile, and I've questioned his pocket feel at times. He has moments of brilliance in the pocket and moments of once he's decided where he's going with the football, it's as though he loses any sense of his surroundings, and that's a very vulnerable quarter to a half second, right? Especially in college football where the pressure comes so quickly. So I find that very concerning for USC. Penn State's very good. I am not sure that they're as good as a number 4 ranking would suggest. I think Vegas kind of backs that up. They're 5.5-point favorites, open 4-point favorites. This game is going to be a lot closer on the field than I think the perception would suggest. But come back to the spot here. Just don't forget about the spot, because this is a really dangerous game for one team and a really not dangerous game for the other. USC's season is likely over if they lose this game. So there's a lot riding on it. But for Penn State, they're vulnerable. USC isn't vulnerable. They've kind of spent all their bullets, and now it's time to throw fists. Penn State doesn't know what this fight looks like yet. They haven't had to face it against any team. They've had a fairly easy walk to this point in the year. You can make the case the Illinois game is a bit of a test, but I mean, let's call a spade here. Beating Illinois at home is not the same as going on the road and trying to beat a wounded animal that has significant talent across the board. So if I'm Penn State, I'm chomping on the fingernails a little bit just because of that fact alone. If you took everything else out and threw it in a vacuum, the spot is pretty spooky.
I like the matchup between first-year coordinators of Kodo Nittany against Lynn. What do you think of that matchup, and could that be the difference maker on Saturday?
I think D'Anton Lynn is a top 5 defensive coordinator in college football, which I think is extraordinarily high praise to give a guy that's in his second year as a coordinator at the college football level. The thing that he does exceptionally well, that he will continue to do well, because he has made a legitimate track record at this point in his 2 years, is make excellent halftime adjustments. Penn State needs to score in the first half. They need to play from in front. I don't see Penn State having a good time on Saturday if they fall behind by 10 points. That's going to be a really big problem for them. Not because they aren't talented, or not because, Andy Kotelnicki's not a great offensive coordinator, but because inevitably after that halftime break, this USC defense is going to look different, because D'Anton Lynn has proven week in and week out those halftime adjustments are probably the pinnacle of his strength, like his tool belt. That's where he is at his best. If I'm USC, defensively, I'm more concerned about some of the personnel issues going on with injuries and the way that Andy Kotelnicki can maybe exploit that. No Eric Gentry, who's their best linebacker and best overall defender. That's a huge loss. Anthony Lucas, who's their best defensive lineman, potentially being questionable, maybe playing a limited number of snaps against a very good offensive line, and a creative play caller who's going to find a way to use extra offensive linemen and be dynamic in the running game. Those are big concerns from a USC defense standpoint. But from a pure coaching standpoint, I mean, there is no aspect of this team right now that warrants more faith and optimism than D'Anton Lynn himself. Every other individual, every other facet of this team has some kind of red flag and concern. That is the only one where you cannot look at it across 6 games and say, or 5 games, and say anything negative for the most part. I mean, they've been as close to flawless from a coaching standpoint as you could ask for. Where USC has failed defensively has been tackling in a very small handful of situations that have been highly, highly consequential. Now, for Penn State, right, their offense does certainly look better and more dynamic than it has in past years. I don't know how much of that is a product of who they've played, how much of that is fool's gold as opposed to substantive. We won't know, I don't think, for another couple of weeks. We'll get another big data point this week, because they're going to get a really good test from a defense that I think has lost a little bit of the excitement nationally that it had started to gain because USC's lost twice. But I mean, let's be clear, they haven't lost these games because of defense. They've lost these games because they've turned the ball over and failed to make 2 or 3 big plays when they needed them in those games. So from a coordinator matchup standpoint, I think it's going to be awesome. I think it's going to be great. I think there's an edge definitely to USC in that, not because Andy Kotelnicki's not awesome, but just because D'Anton Lynn is the best coordinator in college football that no one thinks is in line for a head job right now. right? Like there are guys you look around and go, he's next in line. No one says that about Danton Lynn. He is the best guy that is not like quote unquote next up for his head coaching opportunity.
And that kind of goes back to what I was saying, that again, West Coast teams not getting, in my opinion, the due that they should. But you mentioned the defense. That's exactly why, for my money, obviously Ohio State, Oregon's the number one game in my schedule, but this is the number two because USC is better than a team that's just outside the top 25 because of all the reasons that we've talked about. Hey, Cooper, great to talk with you. Really enjoy it. Enjoy the game this weekend. Hopefully get a chance to talk to you soon.
Appreciate it, gentlemen. Happy to come on anytime. Fight on, guys.
All right. Appreciate it. All right. Thanks, man. Cooper Perkins, once again, joining us. He is the host of the BLEAV in USC podcast. And once again, it is number 4, Penn State at USC, 3:30 Eastern time. And that game, by the way, is on CBS, that marquee afternoon game on the East Coast. We've got more to come. This is Big Sports Radio. Red Grange wasn't just a football player. He was a legend. Discover the untold story of Illini great Red Grange in a new novel by Doug Vilhard called The Golden Age of Red. This captivating book takes you back to the 1920s when a humble young Illinois player transformed into the galloping ghost and electrified the nation. Get your copy of The Golden Age of Red by Doug Vilhard today. Available on Amazon and wherever books are sold.